So the thumbnail for yesterday's update was Bart Simpson writing on the board, Russia is a terrorist state. Russia is a terrorist state. Russia is a terrorist state. And today, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe voted that, yes, they are a terrorist state. 99 to 1 abstention. Like, that's pretty significant. And so there's going to be, I think, some consequences that'll flow with that as well, of what that means if they're designating them as terrorist state. I'm going to move pretty rapidly today because I have about 20 articles, but I won't bore you, I promise. Please just try to stay with me and I'll help you understand what the situation is. The Council of Europe Assembly brands Russia a terrorist state, says RT. So I'm putting RTs right back to back with it to declare the current Russian regime as a terrorist one. And then they concluded Russia officially withdrew from the Council of Europe back in March. So otherwise it would be 99 to 1 with one abstention. So they're no longer part of this. Interfax Ukraine reported that in certain areas of hostilities, the occupying units began to receive orders from top leadership to temporarily stop offensive operations. Okay, that's pretty good. I don't like the next line, even though it comes from Ukraine, which I trust far more than I trust Russia, because of the way that it reads, which is a little bit too propaganda-y sounding to me. Listen, due to the extremely low morale and psychological state, numerous desertions from among all the mobilized, and failure to comply with orders, the General Armed Forces staff reported. Now, I know that this is true, this top portion of what I just read. This is a little bit more speculative, and even though it comes from a source that I kind of trust, I don't want to spend time on that. I want to spend time on this. And this is true, and it's verified elsewhere, and I'll show you. In Kherson region, as a result of pinpoint fire in this particular area, enemy losses amount to about 150 killed, and that's within normal parameters. The Guardian said Russia announces Kherson's evacuation. That's what I was just talking about, raising fears that it will become the front line. So Moscow has announced that it will evacuate Kherson, raising fears, the city of Kherson, not the whole oblast, raising fears that the occupied city and the heart of the South Ukrainian oblast will become a new front line. Well, didn't Russia just say that they were going to fight for the entire territory? Here's Kherson, and so it looks like they're going to abandon north of the river. The Russians will eventually abandon and try to bail out of that. And the Ukrainians will continue to try to press this and try to kill as many as they can along the way. But didn't they just say that they were going to fight for every inch of this land? But yet they were bombing Zaporizhia and bombed the nuclear power plant down here near Endahar in Zaporizhia, and they're abandoning Kherson. Russia releases a map of missile strikes against Ukraine. These last 3 days have been some of the most brutal of the war as far as Ukraine is concerned. Moscow's response to terrorist acts by the Kyiv regime, that's the blowing up something on the Kerch Bridge, saw 70 facilities of Ukrainian energy and infrastructure hit, which resulted in the country losing 50% of its generation capacity. So they did hit power plants and things along those lines. They also hit civilian populations. This map, the only oblasts that were not hit were in blue. They hit in every other one of these oblasts and in multiple places in most of these oblasts. In the wake of Saturday's truck bombing of the 18-kilometer bridge, President Vladimir Putin said that Kyiv's terrorist attacks can no longer go unanswered, and a missile strike wave was launched. Okay, so one hit on the bridge required all of these hits all over the country, which is hardly a proportional response. 15 airstrikes, mount 22 MLRS shelling attacks on Ukraine in the past 24 hours. So this number has actually gone down from the 84 strikes that was on Monday. The enemy continues to attack critical infrastructure, civilian objects in Ukraine, including a children's playground, which was definitely a threat to Russia. The enemy used cruise, aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, and Iranian-made drones for its attacks. But of course, when you overplay your hand, what often happens is that it goes, here's one of the examples, in Kharkiv, just as terrible as other areas where Russia withdrew. President Zelensky said the situation is just as terrible as in Bucha, and he goes on. But when you overplay your hands, what often amounts is that there's a sympathy for the other side. And so the Americans, the Germans, now the British are going to be supplying Ukraine with anti-aircraft missiles. So the long and short of this week is that Ukraine's going to be stronger with some kind of solid air defense that they have not had until now. Now, the good news is that Putin didn't use tactical nukes. Now, what are tactical nukes? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here is an article that just came out today on tactical nukes, how they work. When the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people, Putin said on September 21st. And then he also added, this is not a bluff. Okay, so he's just saber rattling, saying even tactical nukes are on the table. So tactical nukes are known as non-strategic weapons. They're smaller, and even if they're used on the battlefield, it's unlikely to change anything there because they aren't going to be what you would think of. Now, here's how many we have as far as strategic nuclear weapons. Here's how many tactical nuclear weapons each country has and how many are retired or dismantled. Tactical nuclear weapons, if you think about Hiroshima, what happened there, that was a 15-ton kilobomb. A tactical nuke is going to be something like upwards of 50 kilotons, so about 3 times as much. And then the strategic nukes are these 500 kilotons to 1 megaton nuclear bombs. That's like 66 times the size of Hiroshima. If he uses these on a battlefield, he's now become the pariah of the world because the entire world knows that Ukraine is not offensively threatening the demise of Russia. They're just defending their own land. Okay, the General Assembly of the UN passed a resolution yesterday, and the resolution was to defend the principles of the UN Charter by saying that these illegal annexations are illegal. It passed 143 to 5, with 35 countries abstaining. I'll make this larger so you can see the 35 that abstained, and then the 5 countries that voted against were Belarus, North Korea, Nicaragua, Russia, and Syria. Putin held a number of interesting meetings today, but he didn't talk about Ukraine. He didn't talk about it with the president of Turkey. And this is even Radio Free Europe was saying the same thing. They didn't even really hint at it. They kind of hinted a little bit at it with President Abbas of Palestine. He didn't talk about it at all really with the Emir of Qatar. He didn't talk about it really with the president of Azerbaijan. So it was just a bunch of weird press releases on the president's site. Now, Lukashenko, on the other hand, is trying to be relevant by showing that he is, standing with Russia. He reminds me of a B-list celebrity like Gary Busey or something. Like he's just like trying to be out there somehow. But even the AP was saying that Belarus army would not have any real impact on the war. The Belarusian army is weak and demotivated and is not willing to fight with Ukraine, which means that Lukashenko will try to give Putin anything except for Belarusian soldiers. But what he can give is a threat. And as long as his army is there on the border, it's a threat. I would say that it would be great if Poland put their army on the border. Now, I'm not trying to escalate, but if Poland decided that it was going to rim the north end of the country with Polish troops that were commissioned only to kill Belarusians if they crossed the border, I think that would neutralize that threat in a quick way. But that could also draw us into a deeper war, and I don't actually want that. I was just kind of thinking out loud. Here is an article that I want to end with, and it's a perennial article in Pravda and RT, why we desperately need a multipolar world. And if you want to get inside the Russian mindset, they talk about this all the time. The US is in charge of this, the American hegemony and over Western Europe, and so goes the world and that kind of thing. And they very much want to counterbalance it and have a multipolar world, kind of like when the US and Western countries were on one side and the Soviet Union was on the other. I'll give you a taste of what that's like here. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the U.S. has acted as a self-appointed monopolar policeman of the world, and this has caused a tremendous uptick in conflicts in the world. Syria, Afghanistan, Georgia, Libya, Venezuela, and many other nations. Now, some of these nations had nothing to do with the U.S. being monopolar, especially Georgia. That's kind of gutsy to put that in there when it's Russia invading. Since the illegal bombing of Serbia in 1999, which essentially destroyed international law, which the Russians are doing their best to further destroy, America has engaged in brutal and illegal activity as it seeks to break up and plunder Russia. Like they really believe that America's out to get Russia. and prevent it from realizing its natural potential as the world's largest nations with the most resources. Like, so if it wasn't for America getting in the way, Russia would be all that in a bag of chips. But they really believe this. It comes out, and it's a core doctrinal sentiment in the way that the Russians think. If you want to understand more of what's going on and the way that they think, yesterday I put out this Putin is not in control of the war, and I explained why. I've stopped viewing Putin as the key figure to go, if he would only just stop, he can't. He's at the mercy of other forces, and I explained it. If you have a chance, please watch this video. It will help you enormously in understanding what's going on. Thank you for your time, and I'll be back tomorrow.